A fatal attraction, a black and white tale depicting the man as a villain and the woman as the victim. This is how history remembers Auguste Rodin and Camille Claudel. Like a classic fairy tale, it was love at first sight for Rodin when he first met her. Although Claudel's work is continually mistaken for Rodin's, both sculptors developed an individual symbolistic style, molded from their tumultuous time together to their separation and beyond. When Rodin took on Claudel as his first pupil, he was already 43 years old. After pursuing her to model, Rodin created his first bust of her in 1884. In 1885, after her first exhibit, Claudel became one of Rodin's studio assistants. A series of letters Rodin wrote portrayed the depth of his obsession for Claudel. At this point, Rodin had been married to Rose Bierut for 20 years. Yet these letters depict his fixation with Claudel, a love more passionate than what he held for his wife and the mother of his child. After years of rebuffing Rodin's advances, Claudel reciprocated his feelings. He represented the success she desired. Rodin and Claudel entered a contract listing parameters for their relationship. Her family detested this, especially after discovering she was the mistress. Claudel abandoned the notion of marriage, liberating her to freely pursue her passions while not burdening her to choose between motherhood and sculpting. In Shakuntala, Claudel emulates feminine desire. The female figure is no longer just an object for a male to use. Claudel shows the viewer mutual consent between the nude figures. She perpetuates the idea of women being more than society's expectations, and purposefully contradicts the idealized standards of beauty and the power dynamic in heterosexual relationships. The man is looking up at the woman as he embraces her around the waist, grazing her temple with his lips. The positioning of the woman above the man opposes convention, because she is above him in the hierarchy. The depth of their shared emotions is seen as she leans into his touch and meets his face. The figures are joined together in a circular fashion, as if they are one being. From the way he embraces her around the waist to their faces melting together, to her hand resting on the man's lower back, Claudel sculpts the climax of the lovers being reunited with each other, capturing the awkwardness in their positions. In their reunion, he abandons propriety and leaps to embrace her in his arms as she shields her chest from the viewer's eyes. Claudel drew inspiration from Kalidasa's, a Sanskrit poet's Hindu legend about Shakuntala, and how she finds, loses, and regains the love she felt with the prince. Shakuntala, a young girl raised by a hermit, meets a prince in a forest and falls in love with him. He eventually forgets about her due to a spell, and she bears his child. Eventually, they are reunited after the prince breaks the spell. Claudel shows her own longing for Rodin after he abandoned her. This piece was pivotal in Claudel's career because she daringly portrayed both figures in the nude. Rodin's small sculpture, Eternal Springtime, depicts the reversed relationship between the man and the woman. The positioning of both figures is dramatic and athletic. The man holds the weight of the woman. He is in an elevated position, sitting on a rock as she is draped across his arm, with her lower body kneeling on the floor. The man wields the power in the relationship and molds the woman with his touch. Rodin suggests that men can easily manipulate women to do their will. The woman cannot hold up her own weight and relies on the man to carry her. Rodin perpetuates the convention that women are sexual objects, even though he sculpts both figures in the nude. The male's leg covers his genitalia. This is significant because the man's penis is typically out on display as an extension of his masculinity. Yet, Rodin broadly displays the woman's vagina. The figures are joined from head to hip as if they are one. The man ripples with muscles as the woman is very voluptuous. Rodin conforms to standards of beauty and the idealized form. This work was originally named Zephyr and Earth, another reference to mythology. In 1887, Rodin created a small 20-inch bronze figure and named it Perseus and Medusa. Perseus, the hero, trumps over the demon and raises her powerless head as his trophy. Ironically, after the severance of their relationship, Claudel created Perseus and the Gorgon, a 6-foot-tall marble statue. In the name, she chooses to feature the hero yet leaves Medusa nameless, and relies on the viewer to have previous knowledge. It is a statement that history remembers the triumphs of man, and how Medusa is thought of as a monster man has vanquished. Her story is not important, her death is. Claudel spited Rodin by enlarging the size of the sculpture using marble. The medium Rodin could not sculpt himself. In Claudel's work, Perseus grasps Medusa's head, but the danger of the situation is evident. Claudel highlights the reflective material of the shield that Perseus uses to eventually defeat Medusa. Interestingly, Claudel fixes the gaze of both Perseus and Medusa onto the shield, and suggests that Perseus and Medusa were transformed into statues. Claudel drapes a cloth around Perseus's body, hiding his genitalia from the viewer's eyes and removing the physical representation of his masculinity. His body is lean, almost feminine. Medusa's body lays on the floor in a fetal position at Perseus's feet. Claudel carves her own self-portrait onto Medusa's face to show how mutually destructive their relationship was. Even after their final separation, Claudel continued to inspire Rodin. In 1890, Rodin sculpted The Sculptor and His Muse. This piece is a self-portrait of Rodin based on The Man with a Broken Nose. Rodin positions himself like the thinker. Tragically, the muse distracts the man from his deep contemplation. The man's face distorts, as if he is suffering by not giving in. He masks the horror evident on his face with his hand. The man is not conventionally represented by his face and genitalia. The muse, an idealized version of Claudel, stands on top of his lap, grazing his face, letting her hair cascade over him. The hair in the man's face are coarse, like the rock he sits upon. Their two figures are hidden in the hair, blurring the lines of identity and separation between the two figures as if to show this is how violent the inspiration is. The muse is boldly caressing the sculptor's lap. Rodin portrays the muse as the one seeking intimacy. The sculptor tries his hardest to resist the muse, but his strength is waning. Desiring her own space, Claudel left Rodin's studio in 1893, but she still sought his counsel. This year marked the completion of Clotho in marble. As one of the fates who control destiny, an older woman, Clotho, is tangled in the thread of life composed of her hair. Almost as if she is dancing, Clotho writhes in pain, but still persists in her task. She is the source of destiny, a theme Claudel continues to explore and challenge. At only 28 years old, Claudel sees herself as Clotho. Her relationship with Rodin aged her beyond her years. Claudel is willing to rip herself from her pre-threaded destiny. What she believes to be is Rodin. Going against conventions of beauty, Claudel molds Clotho as emaciated and skeletal. The viewer sees her ribs jutting out from her torso, her skin misshapen by trauma. The knotted hair looks extremely painful and almost dread-like. With La Valse, the salon displayed them. Critics believed these works to be of her own original design without Rodin's influence. After their separation, Claudel created only two new and inventive works. In 1907, Claudel disappeared from the art community. Growing increasingly paranoid about Rodin, her hatred for him grew. Rodin attempted many times to seek her company. After her father passed away in 1913, her brother Paul assumed legal custody and committed her to a mental asylum. There she would spend 30 unproductive years waiting for her death. A friend came to visit her and believed she was sane. Rodin stayed knowledgeable about her well-being and status in the asylum by donating to her care. Popular opinion insists that Claudel is the, quote, classic example of a woman artist who has been oppressed and abused by a more successful man, end quote. She is remembered as Rodin's victim, a, quote, genius who failed to achieve due to recognition, end quote. History remembers Claudel as a warning why the patriarchy fails women and restricts their influence on culture.